Hello and welcome back to the Scenario 7 podcast. Yes, again, there is no Sam Cole because he is still on holiday. And you probably guessed it, he's in France. He didn't get tickets to the race, but he is in France enjoying his time under the sun. But I am here again to host. And of course, I am again with Joe Roberts. Joe, how are you?
I'm doing good, Josh. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad, thank you. I'm hoping this podcast, the thing that happened last time, doesn't happen again. But if it does, it's just a curse. It just seems to happen with me. So let's pray for it not to happen this week. But let's jump straight into the French Grand Prix review. And obviously, it was at Paul Ricard. And we're going to start off with the weekend on Saturday at qualifying. So going for Q1, a shock exit, his home Grand Prix. Gasly went out in Q1, finishing in 16th. And also Schumacher, he went out at 19th after his track was deleted for track limits because he was originally in the top 10, I believe, and then his time got deleted because he went wide at turn 3. And then also the rest of the bottom 5 were Stroll, Zhou, and Latifi. Moving into Q2, another not so much of a shock anymore, but still is a shock because of what car he's in. Ricciardo was out in Q2. He came 11th. The others also out in Q2 was another home race of Ocon, who is also French, and then Bottas, Vettel, and Albon are the others out in Q2. And then down to the business in Q1, Leclerc managed to get himself on pole thanks to a massive slipstream from his teammate Sainz, who qualified 9th. But as you're probably aware, he was going to start at the back of the grid because he took an engine penalty. And that was also the same for Magnussen, who qualified 10th. Didn't do a lap in Q3, but again, he took an engine penalty, so he was starting at the back of the grid. Following the rest of the order, Verstappen was in P2, Perez was P3, Hamilton P4, and a great lap from Norris to put him in a Mercedes sandwich in P5, Russell P6, Alonso P7, and surprisingly, Tsunoda did very well this year round in France, and he qualified P8. So moving on to the race. It had its moments, I'd say, but for the majority of the race, I'd say it was more like a parade, like it usually is around France. But Joe, what were your overall thoughts on the race this year?
I thought it was exciting for 18 laps until a certain Ferrari driver put it in the wall. Apart from that, I thought it was basically. I put it on a chat that it's going to be a boring race now, and it was. It's just a track where you can't really overtake, which is the most disappointing. I think if they just went apart, so not having the chicane, just have a long straight, I think potentially get more moves and potentially make it a bit more exciting track. But I've got a small feeling this track won't be in the calendar next year, which I think for me, I wish the French organisers chose a better track because obviously they have Le Mans. Yeah, I don't know if that's the FIA graded circuit for F1, but that could have been a better option. But yeah, it was a very dull race, but yeah, it's just how it is.
Yeah, picking on what you said about France potentially not being on the calendar next year, there have been a lot of talks in the paddock about France and potentially Spa not being on the potential lineup or calendar for next year, the one that's being written as we speak, probably. So those two aren't currently on it, but we don't know if that's true or not. But also, we know that Las Vegas is coming in next year, and they're in talks with going to South Africa. I'm not sure if that's for next year or for a later date, but if those races want to fit in, some races will have to leave because the calendar's already too big as it is. I think it'd be a shame to see Spa go, but like you said, with this track Paul Ricard, there's probably better French Grand Prix they could choose. It's just about whether the FIA deem the track safe or not. But yeah, so that's the thoughts on the race. I'll go into the incidents as they happen by lap, and then Joe, I'll get your thoughts on each one as we go through. So luckily, starting on lap 1, there's always something going on lap 1. And this time it involved Yuki Tsunoda, who after his great qualifying on Saturday, he was spun at turn 8 after the Alpine of Ocon got on the curb and seemingly got some understeer and veered into the back of the AlphaTauri. Ocon then received a 5-second penalty for causing a collision a few laps later, so it wasn't gone unpunished. But Joe, what did you think of that incident?
Yeah. It was just it was Ocon's fault. Went a bit too deep, and then just obviously Tsunoda just not cut across, but just kind of didn't know he was there. So yeah, it was. I think I find it a bit weird that you got a 5-second time penalty where it doesn't really a 5-second time penalty can be made up quite easily. Yeah, and then obviously Snow just goes to the back of the field. So I thought it was quite weird, the 5-second time penalty, but I think that's just how the FIA do their penalty systems.
Yeah, I'd probably say I think he got it more because Tsunoda went from 8th to straight to the back of the grid. So I think that's why Ocon couldn't go unpunished. But like always, there's always a debate for each incident. So we can go on it for ages, but we won't. Move on to the next one. Lap 18, the big incident of the race. Leclerc crashes out of the race. He loses the rear mid-corner at turn 11 and drifts into the barrier, and he wasn't able to get his car back out of the barrier, so he was stuck there. A full safety car is called, and of course, everyone jumps into the pits. When you first saw it, we heard back his radio. We weren't too sure if it was throttle related or not, but he seems to have come out afterwards and said it was just a mistake from him. So, Joe, what did you think of this incident, and what do you think he could have done better to avoid it?
Well, just being a bit smarter. The problem I have in Leclerc at the moment, and basically Ferrari in general, is that they feel like they're doing the mistakes they did in 2007 with Vettel, where obviously Vettel crashed, I think, around this point in Germany, and then basically gave Lewis Hamilton a shot at the title. Obviously, it's not in the same situation because obviously Max is so far ahead now, but it's giving Red Bull and Max a gap that I think they can sustain for the rest of the season. If they just win races here and there, they'll be able to hold the gap. So in terms of that incident with Leclerc, I think it's going to be looked on and defining point. As I said I think in Silverstone a couple of weeks ago, that race was defining if whoever's going to win that would win the championship. Obviously, Leclerc gained points on Max, but didn't win it because of a mistake from him. So it's like that. I think it's a mistake that shouldn't be made if you want to win a championship, and it was a very clumsy mistake. But also Ferrari at the moment are made a mistake around France, maybe not leaving Leclerc out prolonged to have that mistake, but we will never know if it would have happened if he was just pit early onto the hards.
Yeah, I completely agree with the fact that I think Leclerc's just having too many mistakes to be considered fighting for the championship. He's still there, but he's just too far off it because of all these incidents that he has. So if he wants to really fight and compete for world championships in the future, he just needs to sort these out and just have less incidents like Max does. But yeah, there's nothing much more you can say on that incident. So funny, like I said, everyone jumped into the pit after Leclerc crashed. And a lap later, on lap 19, it's another mistake from Ferrari as they give an unsafe release to Carlos Sainz, who has to pretty much go out as fast as he can, just about misses the McLaren pit crew, and forces Albon, who was driving down the pit lane, to brake sharply. And I think he locked up his tyres as he was doing it, so luckily they were coming off. But yeah, an unsafe release from the Ferrari pit crew, who then, about a few laps later, Sainz received a 5-second penalty for the incident. I think that one was obvious, but Joe, there's probably not much more to say on that one.
I think the only thing to say on is it's getting. I think this is the bit where, when it goes into the pits, it should be considered anything like unsafe release to be a bit more harsh. I think 5 seconds is quite a lenient penalty when if he hit Albon, he would have taken out a mechanic. I think that's where safety has to be the main factor when it's like why we don't have refueling. But yeah, there's nothing more to say on that.
Okay, cool. And then lap 22, so only 3 laps later, I think the safety car might have just gone in at this point. But Tsunoda unfortunately retires from the race with car damage after his first lap incident with Ocon. Then moving on to lap 23, Schumacher and Zhou collide going into turn 11. So the same place that Leclerc crashed, Schumacher and Zhou collide. Zhou drifted slightly wide and clipped Schumacher's rear wing as the Haas fan tried to take the long way round. That sent Schumacher spinning, and Zhou lost a bit of front wing, but he was able to continue, but he went straight into the pits. Zhou then received a 5-second penalty 3 laps later for this incident, the third one of this race. Joe, what were your thoughts on this incident?
I don't know. I think for me, looking at it, kind of maybe a race incident, but I understand why the FIA gave it, just because it's basically taken out another driver.
Yeah, I think it was pretty much the same reasoning as lap 1 with Yuki Tsunoda and Ocon. It's just the way that it forced Schumacher back quite a while because he had to spin and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think the 5-second penalty was deserved, really. Moving on to the next one, lap 39, more contact, but this time between the other Haas of Magnussen and Latifi. Magnussen was able to continue down the road. However, the Williams man was sent wide and lost plenty of time. I believe this was at turn 2 or 3, where Latifi went straight over the curb, which was quite bumpy, and he lost quite a lot of time, but not too sure where it was. But Joe, what were your thoughts on this incident?
Is that the Stroll and Latifi one?
No, it's Magnussen and Latifi.
Oh yeah, Magnussen. I think it's just a racing incident. I think Magnussen kept his nose in, and Latifi should have gave him space.
Yeah, I think that's what it was deemed, because there was no penalties received. So that's your thoughts on that one. And then 2 more, lap 42, another big incident between 2 big teams at the front fighting for the podium. It was between Russell and Perez. They collided at turn 8, so going into the chicane. Russell, I think it was a bit stupid, but Russell tried to make a move down the inside of turn 8. There wasn't much space, and they made contact as Perez was turning into turn 8. Perez then had to cut the chicane as a result, and he emerged ahead of both Russell and Sainz. He did give the position straight back to Sainz because he slowed back down, and Russell did stay behind him. But Joe, what were your thoughts on this incident?
I'm just looking back to last year, where you probably know what I'm going to say about Saudi Arabia, Brazil. There's a number of tracks where a certain other Red Bull did similar stuff, and it wasn't deemed an incident. So yeah, as in it could go both ways. For me, I think it was the correct decision not to give Perez a penalty. But if you're looking back on last year, obviously the rules are completely different now, because of that actually being clarified. It probably should have been a penalty if you're looking back on last year's rules. But yeah, it just happened. It was a bit, I don't know, opportunistic from Russell, and basically caught Perez out, but again didn't really make the corner.
Yeah, that's why I don't think if anyone should have got a penalty here. I think it was just a racing incident, but I think Russell was a bit clumsy. He tried to go into the corner a bit late, and there was a gap, but it was a small gap. And we all know Perez had to follow a racing line to get around the corner, so Russell's space was always going to go at some point. So a bit clumsy, but I'm glad there was no penalties because neither really deserved one. Then going on to the final incident, which doesn't really need talking. It's just lap 49, 3 laps before the end. Zhou retires from the race, and he caused a virtual safety car, which did create a great moment towards the end of the race, but we'll get onto that later. But yeah, Zhou was I think the 3rd or 4th retirement of the race. He was a 4th. Him, Latifi, Magnussen. Oh no, the fifth actually. It was him, Latifi, Magnussen, Leclerc, and Tsunoda were all the retirees from this race. But that is the end of all the incidents during this race. We're now going to go through who had the better weekends. So I'm going to run through each team. Will just tell you how many points they got, and then we'll pass over to you, Joe, to then have your general thoughts on each team.
Okay.
So somehow, even though they came first and fourth, Red Bull still came away with the most points with 37. Then Mercedes had a great weekend, closing the gap to Ferrari as they came away with 33 points, with their cars finishing second and third. And then Alpine had the third best weekend, with their team getting 12 points, with Alonso having sixth and Ocon finishing eighth. Followed closely behind by Ferrari, who got 11 points, so only 1 point behind Alpine, with obviously Leclerc DNFing and Sainz coming from the back of the grid to finish fifth. And I'm sure you'll go on to talk about him, but he could and should have finished higher. And then next, McLaren, they had an all right weekend. They had 8 points, 4 short of Alpine. So Alpine now jump ahead of them in the constructors. But Norris finished 7th and Ricciardo pretty much stayed 9th, because that's where he started. And then the only other team to get a point were Aston Martin, with both their drivers scrapping on the last lap to see who would get that last point. I think they collided at the end, but I'm not too sure. I think they collided on the last corner. But Vettel finished 11th and Stroll managed to pip his teammate to finish 10th and get the last point. And obviously Alfa Romeo, Haas, AlphaTauri and Williams all didn't get a single point. So not the best weekend for them. But Joe, what are your thoughts on each team this weekend?
I'm going to do it based off the constructors rather than your mini point system. So obviously Red Bull are first. I thought Red Bull had a very interesting weekend. I thought they were the second slowest car. And if Perez was a bit more aware of the virtual safety car, he might have been P3 on the podium. And obviously Russell came past him and obviously got a P3. So yeah, I thought they had a good weekend. The fact is they gained points off Ferrari. Ferrari, I thought, had a quite horrific weekend. Just in terms, as in like it was going swimmingly until they decided to be stupid in the strategy, and also Leclerc being a bit stupid and not stupid, just making mistakes, which is a common theme in Ferrari and him at the moment. And again, as I said, personally, I think Sainz should have got P3 because he would have pulled away. Yes, he would have had 10 laps to go, but I think with his pace, the drop-off would have been quite minimal. Then on Mercedes at the moment are being, I would say now, the dark horse in terms of actually going for the championship, and maybe the drivers. If the packers, there's obviously a package at France, now there's going to be a package at Hungary, quite large. If those two work very well, obviously qualifying pace needs to improve, but obviously race pace isn't improving. I think they're quite a stable gap to Ferrari and Red Bull now, so they could now be challenging for the title if the Hungary package works, and obviously then works for the rest of the season. Then Alpine, I thought they had a good solid weekend, just getting points on McLaren. I think that's good for an Alpine's perspective. Alonso did well and Ocon did his job on Ricciardo. And then McLaren just had a really, I think for me, an average weekend. Lando kind of had not very good start, which meant he was behind Alonso, which meant his race was basically dictated by Alonso. So the Alpine pit crew or pit guys, and then Alfa Romeo, I didn't really see that much. I don't think they didn't get any points, did they?
No.
So again, it's just a bit of an average and dismal weekend, considering Zhou obviously retired. Haas, I think, had very unlucky. They could have made their strategy work, pitting early. If it wasn't for the customer team on crashing out, then AlphaTauri could have had a good weekend if Tsunoda didn't collide with Ocon. And then Aston Martin, I think they came 10th and 11th. So I think it's a good step. Obviously, in the step they not the step they want to take, but a good step in order to progress up the field. And Williams, their package looks like it's working. Considering Latifi's actually close to 19th makes the package seem good. So yeah, it's a progression for Williams. Hopefully they get more points in the future, but it's a good progression for Albon and obviously Latifi. Obviously if you didn't have that collision with Magnussen, could have got a decent result.
Yeah, just to add in your point at the start between Russell and Perez for the virtual safety car, I think Red Bull did go on to complain, saying that the virtual safety car didn't go back to green flag quick enough. They said it took too long. I think it should take 30 seconds, something like that, and they said it took over 50. Not too sure on the final details, but I don't think anything will happen or anything has happened because of it. So I think they just got to accept the fact that Russell just caught Perez napping basically and overtook him towards the end of the lap. So that moving on from the actual race itself, just going to mention the predictions that me and Joe made in the preview and say how many we got right. So Joe, you managed to pick up 2 points because you managed to predict that Tsunoda on lap 1 would cause the first incident. So you've got a point for the lap and a point for the driver. I again have had another good weekend with 4 points. I also predicted Tsunoda on lap 1 to have an incident. So there are 2 points there. And I also predicted the top 2 of Verstappen and Hamilton to finish first and second. So being laughed at in the group chat for putting Hamilton second has actually worked out because he finished second in the race. So it's another 4 points for me. But moving on towards the end of the podcast, we'll now talk about our driver of the day. So Joe, who was your driver of the day?
For me, it's any of the Mercedes drivers. Obviously, you could probably pick Stroll because Aston Martin got points, but I pick, for me, one of the Mercedes guys, and obviously Lewis Hamilton getting second. Solid job. It's actually showing progression for Mercedes. Obviously, they're not quicker than the Ferrari and Red Bull, but they're putting a gap that's not too big, is actually starting to close in the race pace. Just needs to get a bit more quicker in qualifying to be up there and try and disrupt the Ferrari and Red Bulls, which looks like they potentially could do. And obviously, it's a massive package again, I said, for Hungary. So yeah, and it was just a solid drive and started to close in on Max in the latter stages of the race, and obviously pulled away from Perez. So yeah, it's a quiet race, but a very solid job from Lewis Hamilton.
That's a good choice from you there. He was one of my 2. But there were quite a few, like you said, to choose from. But I think I've had to go for one of the obvious choose the driver of the day, just because he started so far at the back and managed to climb his way through the field. So obviously I'd choose Sainz, even though his team, it could have been a better result, but his team fumbled the bag again. I still think he was my driver of the day just because he went from the back of the grid, fought his way through the field superbly to finish 5th. He was also, I'd say, the quickest driver all weekend, which was proven in Q2 in qualifying when he set the fastest time by almost over a second to everyone else behind him. He also made his overtakes look effortless. That might be because of his car, but it still needed a good driver behind that car to make those overtakes happen. But like I said, he was let down by his team strategy again, meaning he could only finish 5th. So it could have been better, but it was still a great weekend for him, and he managed to pick up some valuable points of 11 points. So that wraps up our podcast for this week. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Please look out for later on in the week. We will be putting out a Hungarian preview because there's only a week's gap between these races this week. And unfortunately, after the Hungarian Grand Prix, it is the summer break, so there will be a gap. We should try and bring out some podcasts. We're hoping to bring out some other content for you, but we'll let you know in later podcasts. But yeah, like I said, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and please like the video. And if you have any comments, please do write them down in the comment section. And I promise you this time we will look at them and hopefully reply to some of them, because Joe had brought that up before we started this podcast. So we will hopefully reply to some of you this time instead of just ignoring you. But yeah, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.